Okay, we are diving quickly into the reread here, Chapter 3, Daenerys, and we have a recap, and then we will jump into the summary.
Yeah, so recap of last week, Chapter 2, Catelyn. Catelyn enters the Godwood to comfort her husband, Lord Eddard, as well as give him grave news. Lord Jon Arryn is dead, and the King Robert Baratheon rides north.
Yeah, and that was a neat chapter. We get to see more of the more houses in Westeros, and we get to we learn about two different faiths and religions.
Yes, we do.
So we kind of have the old gods, and as a recap, we have the seven.
Yes,
right,
which are later referred to as the new.
Yes. So, okay, real quick, I forgot to put this in Chapter 3. There we go. So we'll jump into the summary here for Chapter 3. All right, here we go. We move east to the continent of Essos, specifically Pentos, and we're going to talk about the free cities. There are 9 free cities. Pentos is one of those cities. Here we find Daenerys and Viserys, Targaryen. They are believed to be the last of the ancient Targaryen bloodline. Their father was the Mad King, or King Aerys II Targaryen. Daenerys and Viserys are staying with Magister Illyrio of Pentos. In an effort to take back the 7 kingdoms, Viserys agrees to allow Khal Drogo to marry his sister Daenerys. Daenerys provides us with a little history lesson, while Illyrio's servants prepare her to meet Khal Drogo. Daenerys is afraid to marry Khal Drogo. She also does not want to wake the dragon, though. So she's kind of weighing that in this chapter. But what's neat, a lot of it is kind of told. We get a lot of history as to, Robert's Rebellion. We mentioned it last chapter, and we'll mention it here again. Is sort of the events that took place and how people sort of, everything sort of ended up working out, I guess, in the rebellion. Okay. All right, so we've got this divided into a couple thirds for you. We have the Bath. Mm-hmm. We have Illyrio, and then we have Khal Drogo. So we'll start with the Bath here. And I kind of wanted to just describe a few things to get us started because we are in a new place. Mm-hmm. Our free cities, the ones that we hear most about are Braavos and Pentos. Mm-hmm. Volantis is mentioned a lot. You have Lys, Tyrosh, Myr. I don't know how to say all these. Norvos, Korho, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
And then Lorath or Lorath. Okay, so the those are your 9 free cities, and what's interesting about that is they sort of have like a loose sort of I don't know, we see this interesting dynamic with the Dothraki coming in, the Dothraki horde, and sort of how they play a game. It's almost like their own Game of Thrones without a throne, Mm-hmm. Just the politics of it, I guess. But they are free cities. Technically, you're not supposed to have slaves in these cities. It's sort of the big thing. Braavos is
we'll get to that much later.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Braavos is founded by slaves. So there's a whole history and tie back, to Valyria there, actually. So, all right. So that's a little bit on the cities, the location where we are. And, I always kind of forget when you look at the map, too, that Pentos and Braavos are basically just directly east. Mm-hmm. And you kind of forget. I always had in my head that when I was reading the books, I guess just need to pay more attention to detail, but Valyria is actually south. It's very much south, and it's near the Slaver's Bay and stuff. So just for perspective here, I guess, this is, if you imagine where Dragonstone is in Westeros and King's Landing and such, directly across the way, you'll have Pentos and Braavos and Tyrosh. So right there on the coast. Okay, do you have anything else on those, or do you want anything you wanted to?
Well, actually, our vocab for this week, our cool connections, is actually I have the A Song of Ice and Fire wiki description of Pentos, and so I could kind of read it. It's a little lengthy, but I think it's kind of interesting and important just to get this huge thing out of the way, because this mostly will also describe the difference between Westeros and Essos. And so, first of all, if you look at a map of Westeros and Essos, you can clearly see what they're kind of designed after. Westeros is much more like Ireland and England, whereas Essos is a little more like Spain and Italy. And it's just, I think what Gur drew inspiration from. Actually, Westeros people have drawn maps, and it looks just like the United Kingdom.
Yep.
And so it's just interesting. So Pentos is a large city, more popular than Astapor or Slaver's Bay, cities we'll get to eventually, located closest to all of the free cities to King's Landing in Westeros. So we had mentioned in our history last week about the broken neck, right? Yeah.
Yep.
There was a land bridge, and it something happened, we don't really know, and it caused the land bridge to like break, and so King's Landing and Pentos are the closest of the narrow sea. The city lies on the bay of Pentos off the narrow sea, with the flatlands and velvet hills to the east. Pentos has massive high walls, is often regarded to as the most vulnerable of the free cities, however. The city has many square brick towers. Most of the roofing is done in tiles. Pentos has walled estates such as mains belonging to Magister Illyrio and Khal Drogo. So Khal Drogo owns quite a bit of stuff in Pentos. The Sunrise Gate allows the traveler to exit the city to the east in the direction of the Rhoyne. The fastest way to Volantis from Pentos is by sea. The faith of R'hllor is practiced in Pentos. A large red temple is located in the city, and the red priests are known to sing and light their night fires. Pentos is a city with equals power, ruled over by a prince and a council of rich magisters like Illyrio. The prince has mostly ceremonial function, however, while the magisters rule. The prince, who is chosen from 40 families, presides chiefly over balls and festivals. I'm going to kind of skip some of this other stuff. Slavery was heavily practiced for most of the Pentoshi history, but Braavos imposed abolition after several wars. Pentos is also has a lot of ships because they cross the narrow sea. Obviously, they're trading with Westeros. They have their own coin, and slavery is forbidden. And some of this other stuff isn't super important. So Pentos, you can see it reminds me, I think, if you look at like architecture of, say, Spain, I think is kind of where Gur is drawing inspiration from there.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. It does have a rich history, which actually, when we get to the chapters in A World of Ice and Fire, there's a lot of stuff about how far, the Targaryen, well, it wasn't Targaryen, the Valyrian Empire, sort of stretched. So, yeah, we'll get into all that later and stuff. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's neat that they practice they worship R'hllor, and I was trying to find some more, articles and stuff on the different faiths. There are basically a crap ton of religions, that are mentioned and worshipped, in Essos. So it just happens to be that at Pentos we have R'hllor. So, okay, I'm going to move on to just a description of some of our characters. So Daenerys, her physical description, she is 13 years old.
Yeah, she is.
She's 13.
Which is very interesting.
Very interesting. She's 13, and she has these, they talk a lot about her bright, like violet eye color, which I thought, is just in case you didn't know. I mean, your Targaryens have that silver hair with the purple violet eyes, and so she's also mentioned to be very skinny, not full of breast.
Yeah.
So I mean, all this stuff is mentioned in this chapter, and it just I pointed out because Gur's writing, it's just interesting. I love this guy, just the detail that he goes into in describing his characters. Her brother Viserys is also same sort of hair color, eye color, real lean face, kind of a lean, scrappy looking type of guy, I would say. So he is known as the Beggar King, though, which we'll get into in just a little bit. But I wanted to talk about Dany's like her intellect, I guess, just how smart she is. She, right away is like seeing, we get clear, like I guess when you talk about characterization of a character, whether it's direct or indirect, there's a lot of indirect characterization here, kind of showing us that, Dany's super smart and she's very perceptive, for a 13-year-old. And she and Viserys are very different. He was 8 or 9, I think, when they left, King's Landing. And so I think that influenced who they are a lot. She didn't get treated as a princess, really. I mean, she kind of did, with was it Sir William Derry?
Yeah.
I mean, a little bit. He calls her that here and there, and it was always kind of like, it just feels weird, right? I mean, she doesn't feel real entitled to anything. She just wants to live. I mean, throughout this chapter, she talks about seeing the, children and different people who were the poor, lower class running around Pentos, and almost wishes she could be out there with them, So she doesn't want all of this, regal status and stuff. So, and she sees right through Illyrio and her brother's fallacies and issues and things like that. So, very, very intellectually or very intelligent. So I'll keep pointing that out as we go through the chapter, because there's a really cool part where I didn't even notice it the first couple times I read it, but they talk about the Khal, like even Khal Drogo's slaves have collars of gold. And did you notice that, like, when she meets the first one, she points out that it was just a bronze collar? She's like, clearly they don't have collars of gold.
Yeah.
It's that attention to detail that she sees in, like, characters. So she's told, how rich and wealthy and all these awesome things about even his slaves.
Right.
And then she's like, she sees him, and that's the first thing she notices.
Yeah. She there's a line specifically where she talks about, like, she asks, like, well, why would Illyrio, like, help us?
Yeah.
Like, why is he helping us? And Viserys is so full of himself, and he's just like, well, because I'm the dragon, and it's my king. But then she knows what the people say, and they call him, like, the false king, or the
beggar king,
the beggar prince, or king, or whatever. Yeah.
Yep. Well, and let's see if we can find some more of those quotes, because she mentions it a couple times. I'll see if I can find it here. Well, I'll come back to it. But yeah, she's just very leery of, promises like that. And when they're in the carriage at one point, and they're on their way, kind of fast forwarding into the chapter, but when they're on their way to meet Khal Drogo, and he's talking about all the different people who, are going to support him. Viserys is like, all these people are going to support me. And Illyrio is just letting him talk out his ass, and is sort of like letting it go. And says, it's, so my agents tell me, that my agents, and Dany says, like, well, I don't have agents, but, and I hear people talking, and I don't know that that's exactly true. You're kind of filling his head with these fantasies, I guess. So, but anyways, so I know we had saved, I'll save the description for Illyrio in a second. Did you have more stuff on, like, the bath? Just different things we want to talk
about? There's a lot of stuff specifically that happens with the bath. And actually, my big point kind of comes in this kind of a chapter. Here we go. It is where... So we're kind of learning about the dragon. Mm-hmm. So we've heard a lot about, like, the wolf.
Right.
And now we're hearing for the first time kind of about the dragon. There's a lot. There's a handful of lines here. Right here. Our land, he called it. The words were like a prayer with him. If he said them enough, the gods were sure to hear. Ours by blood right, taken from us by treachery, but still ours forever. You do not steal from the dragon. Oh no, the dragon remembers. And that's Viserys, or that's Dany talking about what Viserys had said. And where is it? I have it here. Okay, so this is when Dany gets into the bath. And this is very, very important, is that it's super hot. The water was scalding hot, but Daenerys did not flinch or cry out. She liked the heat. It made her feel clean. Besides, her brother had often told her it was never too hot for a Targaryen. Ours is the house of the dragon, he would say. The fire is in our blood. Yeah, and so this is the first time that we're seeing the opposite. So not only are we seeing the opposite of Westeros, where we were introduced with the North, where it's like knights and kings and noblemen, and you're in the winter. The prologue is above the wall. So we start above the wall in the land of always winter. And then we get the Starks, and they're talking about winter is coming, and it's cold. And now we're somewhere totally else, on another continent, not as well as like another, country. And it's like nice outside and it's warm, and Daenerys is getting in this hot bath, and they're talking about fire as opposed to, ice. And actually I highlighted this line. It's at the very, very thing. Is when Dany is talking about the gown, I believe. Dany touched it. The cloth was so smooth that it seemed to run through her fingers like water. Now, I did find the line water interesting, because that's the first time we've heard the word water in the show, or in the book, because we have heard the word ice a lot, and now we're just hearing the word water. Is it that big of a deal?
Right.
I don't know. It's also Gur. It could be huge.
Could be huge. Yeah,
could be huge, because what happens when fire meets ice?
Right.
Water.
Exactly. Yeah, the transitioning right there in the opening paragraph. And if you keep going, she said it frightened her. And she pulled her hand away. Is it really mine?
Right.
So note two things here. It's foreshadowing the fact that, this gown is going to bring with a lot of woe, a lot of trouble. And it's frightening, and it's foreshadowing all of that. And then also the idea that, is it really mine? Like Illyrio is giving them a lot of gifts. They mention things that are borrowed. All these things are borrowed, and they're not hers. Is it really mine? So, up to this point, they've been traveling from city to city. I believe they go to 6 out of the 9 free cities during their youth. And for a while, the princes or whoever, the leaders of these cities would say, yeah, come on in. They'd open their doors and it would be fine. And then the longer Robert Baratheon sat on the throne, they shut their doors, and they didn't really weren't as open to letting them come in, or taking them in.
Yeah, I do think we should probably mention that Daenerys, so Daenerys Targaryen, also Daenerys Stormborn, is a big thing. She had been born on Dragonstone 9 moons after their flight, with a raging summer storm threatened to rip the island fastness apart. They said that the storm was terrible. The Targaryen fleet was smashed while it lay at anchor. The huge stone blocks were ripped from the parapets and sent hurling into the wild waters of the narrow sea. Her mother had died birthing her, and for her brother Viserys had never forgiven her. So that's like a huge deal later. So after like the sack of King's Landing, they had fled. So it would be the Mad King's wife. It would be Viserys, and it would then be Daenerys, who was born. Right. Who was born on Dragonstone. So they held them off. The last of the Targaryens held them off, and then Daenerys is born, and then they got the heck out of there.
Right. Yeah, and actually, so they have a fleet, and it is the storm that sort of destroys this fleet. And you wonder, had her mother have lived, how could they maybe have rallied around a queen, a Targaryen queen? But she dies, and you have an 8-year-old and a newborn. So in steps this guy, Sir William Derry, and he came to sort of rescue them. And he actually says that he came along with 4 loyal men. And I've often wondered who those 4 loyal men were that came with Sir William Derry. That's got into Dragonstone, and they traveled to Braavos. And that's where we get this, they lived in a big house with a red door. Dany had her own room with a lemon tree outside of her window. Yeah. And that's been lots of speculation and lots of talk about where that actually was.
Yeah, a lot of people think it's in Dorne.
Right.
And so actually she was living in the 7 Kingdoms. And it could be true, because we know the Dorne, the Dornish, Elia Martell was married to Rhaegar. So the Dornish men have always been kind of loyal to the Targaryens for, it seems like, a long time. Actually, there's a line right after that, just because we're going to get to Viserys and how kind of a jerk he is. Yeah. But before we get there, they had wandered since then from Braavos to Myr, from Myr to Tyrosh, and on to Quor, and Volantis and Lys, never staying long in one place. Her brother would not allow it. The usurper's hired knives were close behind him. Instead, he insisted, though Dany had never seen one. So I will give Viserys some credit here,
Me too.
that Viserys actually, for as big of a jerk as he is, and maybe he's just doing it because he just views Dany as like value to him. It's like this is a chess piece, but he is her older brother, and he does at least like take care of her.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, you got to give him at least credit for that.
Right. And if you think about Dany's life, all of the times he has had with Dany, these 13 years, have been terrible.
Yeah.
These past 13 years have not been good.
Yeah.
So he
for him
thinks
as
back,
well.
For him. Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. For him, and from his perspective, his life was much better before before his sister was born.
Mm-hmm.
And so he reminisces on those times, and I think that's why this bitter nature has always been associated with her. Even though he knows it's not her, it's just that that's the time in which, he didn't have a time to grow to love and admire, playing with his sister when they were in King's Landing.
Because they probably would have gotten married.
They probably would have gotten really close, and it would have been different, and she would have looked up to him and all this different stuff because he was the, her older brother or whatever. Yeah. So I give him credit there too, because I actually in my book, I wrote the word true with a question mark. Is this true?
Yeah.
And I bet it is.
Yeah.
I bet it is true. That she says, even though she never saw one, well, let's give him a little credit here, because I think they were, and we see later on.
Yeah, absolutely. I guarantee they were.
That they were. Now, whether they wanted to kill them or not, I'm not so sure about that. I think it might just be to capture, hold prisoner, all that good stuff. I think the slaughtering of Elia Martell's children, I don't think Ned and Robert would have allowed that.
No.
That was a tragedy.
It's certainly not the way it happened.
Yeah. Right, yeah. But exactly. So, but their maybe Elia Martell herself, but not her children. You know what I mean? And so, I think at this point, if they would have got a hold of Viserys and his younger sister, they would have just kept them. You know what I mean? I don't think they would have killed them. You know what I mean? I don't know. I just don't see them doing that. Now, when she turns out that she's going to make an alliance and marry, and she's a threat, and she has a child, okay, that's when we see Robert Baratheon sort of say, enough of this crap, let's go get her. So part of me thinks it was true. I don't know that they wanted to kill him, but they wanted to capture him for some sort of gain. And it could have just been people in the free cities too. It didn't have to be, the usurper's dogs. Could have been anybody actually. So yeah, that's a good point. I wanted to read really quick though, just to for Viserys here, just to kind of think about how he describes and how they describe Westeros. Somewhere beyond the sunset, across the narrow sea, lay a land of green hills and flowered plains and great rushing rivers, where towers of dark stone rose amidst magnificent blue-gray mountains, and armored knights rode to battle beneath the banners of their lords. And they call it, it's called the Sunset Kingdoms, and them being in the West and stuff. And that was what you had said earlier. According to her brother, that's our land. Mm-hmm. And I thought it just shows you how much he's a daydreamer. He had this horrible thing happen to him. His father is killed, mother is killed, brother is killed. They're all killed. And he has to leave his homeland and imagine how bitter that would make, a kid. So sometimes I feel sorry for Viserys, and I think Dany gets that later on, Mm-hmm. But I think it goes to, when you read about these two characters, completely different upbringings. He's almost too trusting, and he feels entitled to, it makes sense that Illyrio would want to give me all this stuff because he knows I'm the true dragon. Whereas Dany's like, all I've seen is what people say, or hear is what people say in the streets, and I've only ever seen just us traveling from city to city. We've had to sell our mother's jewels. We've had to sell all of our stuff. So yeah. Okay. Anything else from the sort of the first third there, like the bath scene, that you wanted to talk about?
No, I think that's kind of it. The only other thing we really see here is, before we kind of get to Mr. Illyrio, we already talked about R'hllor a little bit. There's a couple mentions that there's just different gods here.
Right.
A couple of things about the Lord of Light. Or Priestess says, "May the Lord of Light shower you with blessings on this most fortunate day, Princess Daenerys." And then another one, a line I have here: "The Lord of Light would hold our city walls against 1,000,000 Dothraki," or so the Red Priests promise, yet why they take chances when their friendship comes so cheap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's Illyrio kind of telling them, saying those things, and it's just, it's. I wonder if he actually practices that. So we'll just jump into Magister, Illyrio. Sorry.
Yeah.
And kind of talk about, I wondered if that's just convenient because that's the religion that's there, or does he really practice? Probably not. He's the description I have of him. It says, this is physical, beneath loose garments of flame-colored silk, rolls of fat jiggled as he walked, gemstones glittered on every finger. And his man had oiled his forked yellow beard until it shone like real gold. Now, something that Gerd does, if those of you who have read, if you've only seen the show, you'll get this right now, and you'll see this throughout all of his writing. He'll mention something like a forked yellow beard, right? And he'll attach it to a character, Illyrio, and then you'll see it. You won't see Illyrio's name later, but you'll hear a description of a large fat man with a forked yellow beard. And it's up to you to say, oh, I know who that is. Yeah. You know what I mean? That's where it gets kind of tricky, and that's where it's sort of like, oh, that's who that is. He might not actually tell you. He's expecting you to remember something from, chapters ago or books ago, you know. So I think that's sort of the cool part, but it's the tedious part of reading a book written by George Martin. It says that also that he, underneath his yellow forked beard, when he bowed his head, there was a thin glimpse of like crooked yellow teeth or whatever. So he's just sort of a glutton.
Absolutely,
pleasures of the world type of guy. So, but he's also up to something. I think this is where we start to get he's a schemer. He's dealing in spices. He has those. Are they slaves, servants?
Right.
What are they? You know what I mean? Clearly, one of them doesn't speak. The old woman doesn't speak, and then he actually likes this fair-haired, blue-eyed, 16-year-old servant was one of his favorites. But they're really more like slaves.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So.
Well, indentured servitude. That's even if you're paying them, right? It can still be slavery.
Right. Yep. Exactly. So that's just a quick little description on Illyrio. You already said this. He serves the Lord of Light. Let's see, anything else here I noted. Oh, we'll talk about the houses here in a second. I have some. I want to talk once we get past Illyrio a little bit, sort of in between Khal Drogo and Illyrio here. Just there's this mention of the houses that are loyal to the Targaryens.
Yeah. Let's do that. So
you want to do that now?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. The only other bit here, while we're on our way through to. Like the wedding, it's not really a wedding ceremony. It's just a meet and greet, I think.
Yeah.
Just to kind of see if Khal Drogo, approves or whatever. Illyrio sort of says that she's regal, and as soon as he says that, Dany's almost like, she's kind of taken back by it, and then Viserys is like jealous. Well, she's too skinny. Yeah. Like he just can't give his sister a compliment. He can't let her have the, exactly. He can't let someone else have the, the spotlight.
Yeah.
So anyways, along the way to this meet and greet, Viserys notes that houses Tyrell, Redwine, Derry, Greyjoy, and the Dornishmen of House Martell have no love for Robert Baratheon, the usurper. So I thought I would talk a little bit about House Derry. So we had the mention of William Derry, I think that's his name, Sir William Derry, and just the that he was loyal to House Targaryen, so much so that there's a subtle reference. I caught this on the wiki, and then I went and actually looked it up. When they are traveling, when Robert is traveling north or south, I know when he's traveling south, that's when they kill Sansa's dog, or direwolf. We'll get to that. But while I think it's on the way up, they remove their Targaryen banners, and they actually... Tyrion kind of notices that he finds them down in the base because he's always walking around in places he shouldn't be, and he notices these Targaryen banners, showing that they're still loyal and they were still hanging, maybe even a month, before they get there. So I think
a fortnight.
Yeah, a fortnight. Yeah, and so Viserys is probably right in that House Derry would be a supporter of the Targaryens coming back. So, so also there's some stuff with House Dairy that happens. It kind of goes back and forth, exchanges hands a little bit, ends up in the hands of a Lannister, which we'll talk about later. But that's the 2-bit there. House Redwine, which I thought I didn't know too much. I've heard it referenced a lot. I know there's the Redwine fleet, and I knew that it was like the largest fleet that we had in Westeros. They are loyal to House Targaryen. During the War of the Usurper, Paxter Redwine actually their liege lord, or their bannerman of House Tyrell, and so they stay loyal to King Aerys. Because Mace Tyrell did as well. So, and they actually use their fleet, and they help the Targaryens during Robert's Rebellion. So that was pretty clear that they would make sense why he would mention them. Tyrell, we just mentioned that. Greyjoy, I thought was interesting that he mentioned House Greyjoy, probably just because they've had their own rebellion.
Yeah, the Greyjoys are loyal to themselves.
Right.
The Iron Islands is kind of like its own thing.
Right.
It's kind of like Ireland in a way.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like its own thing off the United Kingdom. And they've, had their own just stuff going on. And they had battles with England. So in a way, I think that's maybe where Gur was kind of drawing inspiration from them. But yeah, I would say that the Greyjoy, they're their own thing. The Greyjoys just want to be able to rule themselves, which is why they rebel a lot. Yeah.
I think it's a house that he probably thinks. It's funny to me how much Viserys has thought about this. If he's thinking about this and he's playing the Game of Thrones in his mind, he gets those 3 houses, the Tyrell, Redwine, and Dairy, and also House Martell to rally behind him. Greyjoys just cause a bunch of maybe they're enough to disrupt the North from coming down.
Exactly. All you'd have to do to the Greyjoys is say, "You help us, and you're good. You're on your own."
Right.
Yeah, we're grant you freedom.
Yeah, who cares?
And the Greyjoy, and the thing about the Greyjoys is that
it's what they want.
Is that nobody can match them in the sea.
Yeah.
Well, it's just once they have to come on land, they're screwed.
Right. Yeah.
Because they're not that big of a area.
Right. Yep. So I thought that was interesting. I just thought I wanted to point out a couple of those houses, so we kind of they'll come up again later. The Redwine fleet is a big deal, and Horus and Hober, are pieces in this chess game that happened in King's Landing. So, all right, so there's that. Oh, let's see what else we got here on our good friend, the Dragon supporters, Viserys daydreaming. I think that's pretty much all I have. They just kind of go on to describe as they go into this. On their way there, I think it's neat. They pass this like oil painting. That kind of shows, Valyria / maybe the Doom of Valyria, and its influence in this region and stuff like that. So that was kind of cool. So I would imagine that Khal Drogo, if he's I don't know, they call them savages, right, or whatever, but I'm guessing they're somewhat educated, or they know that she's important, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They have to know that she's important. Why is he going to just, So I never really thought about it from his point of view. What does he gain out of this?
Khal Drogo?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's just views it as, okay. Well, I think Khal Drogo...
She's different.
She is different. I think Khal Drogo just views it as... Khal Drogo is somebody who's like, I can conquer whatever I want, and here's a chance to get somebody from Westeros. Like, I'm going to go take this Westeros queen.
Yeah, and he might even
or princess.
He might even be open. Like, when they pitch this idea of like, yeah, we could go back over, and he has a reason. Then if this is his queen or his
well, they're all about like the quest too. It's like the idea of like, I'm going to take Westeros. Nobody's ever taken it. Westeros. Dothraki have never sailed. Maybe he's like, I'm going to be the first to do it, because he's never, as they mentioned, he's never had his hair cut off. Right. Like you have to cut your hair off if you lose, and he's never had to do it.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's probably his ambition. But as Daenerys is walking up to see Khal Drogo, she does come across a knight, and she's interested in who he is, and that is Ser Jorah Mormont.
Yeah. Yeah, and she says, even Viserys is like, before the night's over, I want to speak to him. I want to speak to him, and it's just to see someone, and I love, Illyrio kind of plays off like, oh, come on, he was selling poachers, into slavery, you know what I mean? And that shouldn't be that big of a deal, but he was exiled or whatever, and so, and it's interesting because if they knew anything, I guess, about, like, he's not a member of one of those houses we just listed.
Right. He's a member of the North.
Right.
Yeah.
So his
although be it a tiny house.
Yeah, it's just kind of interesting that they want to latch onto him so fast. And I think it's just this desperation from Viserys, and plus she's intrigued because,
Viserys is flat out like, hey, here is like a nobleman, even if he's, here for whatever reasons, of Westeros. I can get my first like Westerosi, knight on my side.
Right. Yep, exactly. One thing that's interesting here, Dany notices that she's the only... So we're now at the point where she's meeting Khal Drogo, and she's standing here, and she's nervous. She's 13, She's 13, and she notices that she's the only woman in the room.
Yeah.
There's all these different people that kind of show up, and I thought it was interesting if you can find, Matt, all the different people who like showed up to this wedding, or not this wedding, to this meeting. They're from different places and whatnot. I'm going to read a little something about...
Is this when she's getting nervous and she's asking Viserys to let her leave?
Yeah, exactly. And they talk about all the different people who show up. It's probably right before Ser Jorah Mormont. They talk about all the different people.
There's 3 blood riders there of Drogo.
Yeah.
Like Khal Moro, his son Rhaegoro, the Archon of Tyrosh, and then Ser Jorah Mormont, and then Illyrio is there, and obviously Khal Drogo. And so it is. She's just walking into this. She's walking into this room of like all these like very different looking guys and the Far East.
Yeah. So, a description of Khal Drogo: he was a head taller than the tallest man. He was light on his feet. They even mentioned that he was sort of like as graceful as a panther, and she had seen panthers, back at Illyrio's. He was no more than 30 years old. So
he's a younger guy.
Yeah. So he was in his late 20s, maybe almost 30. And so that's good. That makes me feel good because, like Illyrio is like interested in this 16-year-old who's his servant. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, Khal Drogo's a boss.
He's a boss.
Yeah, he's a boss.
Yeah, he is. So,
and Jason Momoa playing him is like literally the perfect
legendary
choice.
I know. It's great. He still, when he sees her on Instagram and stuff, will call her his Khaleesi.
I know. That's great. So I love. Is it Moma or is it like Moa? Momoa or
Jason Momoa? I don't know.
I always just call him Jason Momoa. I hope that's correct. But he's sweet. He's Aquaman. That was another perfect choice for Conan the Barbarian. Perfect.
His skin was the color of polished copper. He has this thick mustache that's bound with gold and bronze rings. He has a long braid that indicated how successful he has been in combat, and that's something that Viserys says, to Dany, is that look at his braid. It goes well past his waist and just shows, what an epic dude he is, and this is the guy that I want. He even says he is Aegon the Dragon Lord come again, and you will be his queen. That was pretty... I was like, okay, maybe he's trying to reassure his sister, but at the same rate, he's just like, this is... If there is one in Essos, this is the boss.
Yeah.
This is the guy who you don't mess with. He said he had over 100,000.
He has an enormous army.
100,000.
Yeah, an enormous army, and we find out in the next, or after the, not to skip too far ahead, but once they get married and Jorah Mormont is talking to when they're marching, Jorah Mormont's talking to, I think just one of the Dothraki, and he's talking about like the difference between plate mail and stuff like that, and Jorah Mormont's even talking about they're just too fast. Like they're too fast. Like Westeros has no chance against these guys in an open field.
Yeah, especially well mounted. Yeah, on their horse. They don't want to go out and meet them in open combat. Exactly. Yeah. No, they would need to use different strategies for sure. So they're like a horde. I mean, Viserys says he only needs 10,000. He's like, give me 10,000, 1/10 of his army, and we're good. So to take the whole horde over would be ridiculous. Yeah. But I mean, gosh,
I don't know if they could take the north.
I don't know.
I think they would take the south pretty easily. Just if you look at like the lands, I think they would have a very difficult time with given their like what armor they have going up north where it's cold.
They would have to fight a different style.
You think about like the grass where it's like a different muddy, terrain. It's hilly.
The cold alone.
You have to drive through trees, so it's a totally different terrain.
Right. Yeah. And they really, I don't know, it doesn't talk a whole lot about their, do they have battering rams, catapults?
I don't think
all
they
that
do.
kind of
I don't
stuff.
think they have any of that stuff. Yeah,
they're more of just this,
they would have
mounted.
they would have a very difficult time, like say sieging a castle.
Yeah. So I agree with you. But anyways, he's a boss. He's pretty cool. So Viserys having this little side conversation where she starts to cry.
Yep.
And I don't want to marry him. I just want to go back home. And they have this big discussion about home.
And Viserys is like, home.
She's starting to wake the dragon here, is what she's doing.
Yeah, let me just home. He kept his voice low, but she could hear the fury in his tone. How are we to go home, sweet sister? They took our home from us. He drew her into the shadows, out of sight, his fingers digging into her skin. How are we to go home? He repeated, meaning King's Landing and Dragonstone and all of the realm they had lost. And Dany is saying, well, why can't we just go back to Illyrio's estate? She says, I don't know. He says, I do. We go home with an army, sweet sister, with Khal Drogo's army. That is how we go home. And if you must wed him and bed him for that, you will. He smiled at her. I'd let his whole Khalasar fuck you if need be, sweet sister. All 40,000 men and their horses too, if that's what it took to get my army. Be grateful it is only Drogo. In time, you may even learn to like him. Now dry your eyes. Illyrio is bringing him over, and he will not see you crying.
Right. Yep. And
that's where we see Viserys turn into a jerk.
A jerk. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if it was, no, he's just a jerk. I was going to say to harden her. I don't know. But, it's like
his whole thing is flat out. His whole thing is flat out.
There's no getting out of this is what he was trying to communicate there. It's just like, you're not, no.
Yeah.
Stop it, straighten up. And one of the last points I wanted to make for this chapter is what he tells her at the end is to straighten up, stop slouching. And he says that at the beginning of the chapter too. Yeah. You slouch too much, sister. And again, just shows the different upbringings that they've had. He understands what it means to, put his shoulders back, put his chest out, and look regal. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't. You know what I mean? But when she does, she looks the part.
Right.
So yeah. So that's basically the chapter. She smiles and she stood up straight. So there you have it. Any other cool
nope.
connections?
That's all I had was just the
Pentos,
the Pentos thing. So
okay. Yeah, and we'll pull out some more stuff from Essos. It's always a little bit they reference it in Westeros and people going there. It has a deep, rich history. Mm-hmm. It can be very confusing, and it is confusing for me. I'll be honest with you guys sometimes. So when I look at it and I learn something new, we're gonna bring it to you. Mm-hmm. So as we learn through the book club, we're gonna kind of pull that piece out and yeah.
You don't get you really the book is a lot heavier in stuff that's happening in Essos because later you get different characters and things like that in the show. So if you're maybe just starting this reread with us, you're like, hey, the show's off, I want to start reading the books. You'll find out very quickly that the show does not include a lot of Essos. Really, it only includes Daenerys, and then later when some of the other characters head over there. Whereas the books, you have like the Blackfires, they're like the Golden Company, a lot of these other characters, and it's bigger and more drawn out and stuff like that. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. What did you think about like Illyrio? Like, I mean, because we sometimes, I think after this, we're done with the read. I kind of like to think about, we don't even get a connection here yet that he's, we don't get any mention that he's connected to Varys.
Right. Yeah.
But we will.
Yeah.
And so again, we've said we're expecting that you've seen the show when you come into this book club. So
So like we've mentioned before, like Ez has read the books. I am much less heavy into these books, so this is kind of a first read for me. Mm-hmm. I've just known the wiki, and so I know kind of what happens and stuff like that. Yeah. But I'm much heavier in the show.
Yeah.
And Illyrio's in the show like twice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas he's a big character in the books.
Right. Yeah. His role. I mean, he tries to convince Dany a couple more times, to come back to Pentos. And she won't go.
Yeah.
She's actually convinced by Jorah to go to Slaver's Bay instead. So.
Yeah, but I think he's cool. I'm curious to find out his motivation outside of. I mean, I know that he's connected to Varys later on, but what is his motivation? What are his things?
Because is he just wants to see is a Targaryen just good for business or what does he believe in? He's getting older.
Right.
What is he trying to secure for himself?
Right.
And it's where you've seen hints of, especially in the show, where he and Varys are talking about for the good of the realm, but it's almost like, what is their end game eventually? Like, who are they? What's their legacy going to be? Those guys don't really have a legacy or a house that they're leading and leaving behind. So they're kind of wild cards, in my opinion. So that's why he's interesting. It's just to sort of see what he wants here with these Targaryens. So I mean, just leave them in peace, or try to put them back as the rightful. I don't know. Interesting. So you guys let us know.